All right, I'm here to talk about mortal intelligence. Let me start by asking, who here is completely comfortable with their own death? Oh, we got a couple people. Okay, cool. Great crowd. Okay, so hopefully by the end of this, we'll all be comfortable with the idea that we're all going to die. It's challenging, I realize. But yeah, just briefly, like Carson was saying, I am an AI philosopher. I have a master's in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. I also am an AI lawyer by day. I'm currently working at Google. So yeah, I like to think about AI. I started my career as an AI researcher 30 years ago, so in the ancient times. And so yeah, so you know, it's a topic that I think we all try to avoid thinking about and talking about, but I think it's really important to talk about it. And for that reason, I'm here to talk about it with you all. And I think it's important to talk about because, 1 second. Okay, here we go. Okay. Yeah, it's important to talk about because of what's going on in Silicon Valley with AI and technology. And, you know, you could argue that what drives a lot of technology innovation today is a fear of death. This is what I think in terms of like transhumanism or techno-utopianism. Sam Altman, Elon Musk, Ray Kurzweil, they're all to some extent driven, I think, by a fear of death. And I think that's a problem. I think that shapes technology innovation, and I would like to see that change. So yeah. Who here has heard of Brian Johnson, the Don't Die guy? Okay, yeah. So he's been in the news a lot lately. I think he's interesting because he's spending millions of dollars a year to reverse his aging and to achieve immortality, but he's doing it by spending his whole life, every day, all day, he's kind of holed up in his home working on this project. So he's not really living, he's sort of like prioritizing quantity over quality, and I think that's kind of troubling. So yeah, and then you have Peter Thiel, he's invested in this company that's trying to reverse the aging process. And he says that he thinks death is a problem to be solved. He wants to be part of this solution to this problem of death, right? And this is kind of the general attitude among the billionaires in Silicon Valley today. And so what I want to do today is contrast that with a more spiritual perspective, maybe a Buddhist perspective or a yogic perspective, which is expressed here by Joan Halifax. When you avoid death, you also avoid life, and we see this with Brian Johnson, right? So about 8 years ago, I was in Varanasi, India, which is one of the holiest cities in India, and there, if you don't know, is where the Hindus take their loved ones when they pass away to be cremated or burned on the banks of the Ganga River, and it's a powerful transformational experience that I recommend to everyone who can afford to go. But these fires, these bodies are burning day and night, all the time. And I spent a few days there on the river just kind of watching this and absorbing this experience. And it was deeply profound and moving, obviously, for me. And yeah, it was something to behold. It's just, to see the way that the culture kind of accepts the fact of death and reveres it and celebrates it to a certain extent, and it's right there in front of everyone, to witness day and night is powerful. And I think it's a kind of approach that we could take ourselves in our own culture, Yeah, really amazing. Contrast this with the attitude in the West, where we mostly try to hide it, we medicalize it, we prioritize prolonging life, even if it means being in a hospital bed, over living your life fully. And sadly, even though the wish of most people is to be surrounded by loved ones when they pass away, the reality is that 60 to 70% of people die alone in a hospital room. So it's something that we could. I think this approach that you see in India and other places is something that we could really benefit from ourselves. And if you there's this guy Ernest Becker who wrote this amazing book, The Denial of Death, about our dysfunctional relationship to death in our culture, and he says that modern society is ultimately an elaborate symbolic defense mechanism against facing our own mortality. I think that's accurate. But it wasn't always this way, right? Ancient cultures have these monuments to death. They have these incredible sort of sacred rituals and ceremonies and practices that they had, and I think we could look to that and take inspiration from that. So, the pyramids of Egypt, obviously, the 7,000 statues at the tomb of Emperor Qin in China, and the Taj Mahal. These are all examples of ancient cultures who had this very healthy relationship to death and to seeing it as part of the cycle of life, essentially. Yeah. Okay. So I want to talk more about the techno-utopians and how we can what we can do about their sort of like strange attitude towards death. Jeff Bezos is another one who is investing in these companies. He's invested in this company, Altos Labs, who is focused on basically reversing the aging process. And I think it's because when you're a billionaire, really the only problem you have in life is that you're going to die, right? So why not pour all your money into trying to solve that problem, right? And in our secular kind of materialist society, the only solution or the only attitude that you can really adopt towards death is to see it as an engineering problem, right? And so that's kind of where these guys come from with this stuff. And so Ray Kurzweil, the kind of godfather of transhumanism, he says that we shouldn't have to accept the fact that we lose our mental agility and our sensory acuity and our physical limberness and our sexual desire. He sees disease and death as a calamity and a problem to be solved. Again, we see this theme, this seeing it as a problem to be solved is part of the problem, I think. Nick Bostrom, the kind of intellectual thought leader among the transhumanists, he thinks that we should be able to live to see the heat death of the universe, right? And I don't know if that's actually something I want to do, Anyway, so I think it's a very strange attitude, and as you may be familiar, the transhumanists have sort of two approaches to this problem of death, right? One of them is sort of engineering the body so that it doesn't deteriorate, and that includes wild ideas like replacing all the organs with artificial organs. Ray Kurzweil wants to get rid of the heart and replace it with these nanobots that pump the blood through the body, right? And I just wonder if you're going to lose your heart and your gut, is that still are you still going to be able to have compassion and embodied empathy and that kind of thing, right? So it's a question that I think is interesting. But the first approach is replacing the body that deteriorates, and then the second approach is finding a way to make copies of our consciousness into machines and using that as a way to achieve immortality. So once we figure out how to copy consciousness, we can then achieve immortality, right? But the thing is, nobody knows how consciousness works or where it comes from, how it arises from chemical firings in the brain. So this is all pure conjecture. There's no science behind this. It's all just kind of hopes and dreams and science fiction, right? So I think because it is all just kind of a guess, then there's no reason to kind of stake our hopes on it. Yeah. So those are the two approaches. But then, the ultimate goal of this whole thing is to, once we've figured out how to make copies of our minds, and then we have super intelligent AI, the super intelligent AI is going to help us to engineer matter and energy to support intelligent computation at the most fundamental level of reality. And then we can permeate matter itself with this computational consciousness and traverse the cosmos as pure information riding on electromagnetic waves. That's the ultimate vision of the transhumanists, right? And I mean, maybe it sounds cool to you to be pure information riding through the cosmos, but I like being a human. I like having a body. I like all these things, So just an example to me of the purely, like the way that taking rationality and left brain, kind of left hemisphere thinking to its extreme, results in these ideas about like abstract information as a way to achieve immortality. And also, I think it's interesting because it's an unconscious, I think, way of backing into a kind of spirituality, right? Like we have this impulse as humans to transcend and to evolve and to, become part of unity consciousness, you could say. And so I think these guys are unconsciously kind of doing that, but trying to do it through technoscience and mundane technologies. And like, it's interesting because I think there's that impulse there, but it's being channeled through these like dysfunctional channels, So I'd like to see that change. There's Elon Musk as Gollum. I think in terms of like achieving immortality, I like this quote from The Lord of the Rings, actually. J.R. Tolkien has Gandalf talking to Frodo, where he's saying, if you keep the one ring, you're going to achieve immortality, but you're not going to grow or obtain more life. You're just going to continue until every last minute is a weariness, And I think there's something to that idea. Like it's important to understand the power of renewal and rebirth in nature. I think we see this at every level. We see this with stars and galaxies. Even the most celestial objects don't live forever. So why should we as humans think that we could live forever? The same point is made by one of my favorite movies, Only Lovers Left Alive, by Jim Jarmusch, where these two vampires have been around for 700 years, and basically in the movie they're just kind of bored, and they're like, what do we do now, So I think there is this, like, we sleep, we rest, we die, we're reborn, It's like, it's part of the cycle of life, and I think it's important to remember that. Okay, so let's talk about the spiritual perspective on death in contrast to all of that. I like this quote from Alan Watts, where he points out that nothing is more creative than death, right? It's the whole secret of life, in fact. It means the past must be abandoned, that the unknown cannot be avoided, that I cannot continue, and that nothing can be ultimately fixed. When a man knows this, he lives for the first time in his life. By holding his breath, he loses it. By letting it go, he finds it, right? And I love this perspective, and I think this is more the direction that I would like to see, thought leaders and technologists heading. Ancient cultures, again, they had this much healthier kind of relationship to death. It makes sense that we, in our secular world, we try to find these technology solutions to everything, but, in ancient cultures, they had these technologies of the sacred, you could say, and they had these rituals for, like, you could say, like, microdosing death in a way. They had, you could say they had shamanic practices, or they had different kinds of transcendental meditation and yoga practices, or these rituals, these kind of mystery rites, like the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece, where they all got together every 5 years, and thousands of people took kykeon, which is a psychedelic potion, to kind of confront, the shadow, the underworld, and death, right? And by having this experience, I think, over and over again, it gives you this comfort level with the whole idea of death. And so, you can do all this through these different shamanic practices, psychedelics, meditation, breath work, and these experiences give you the direct experience of dissolving into something larger than yourself, which is, I think, an important experience for everyone to have. And then I'm calling this mortal intelligence, which is where you start to learn to bring death in as a friend and an ally, and to keep death. A lot of indigenous traditions talk about keeping death close by your side as a reminder of your mortality. So yeah, so I'm offering mortal intelligence as an alternative to these attitudes in Silicon Valley with the transhumanists and the techno-utopians. In fact, I'm writing a book about the 9 intelligences that go beyond cognitive or intellectual intelligence, and mortal intelligence is one of them. And I think it's important to remember these unique qualities of being human that go beyond just intellectual intelligence. Yeah. Because I think, when you accept your own mortality, it frees you to live more fully and to live with compassion, gratitude, and courage, to really live, basically. So, the first advantage of having these kind of microdose death experiences of different kinds, you could say, is that they give you this experience of comfort with death and this connection to a kind of larger unity consciousness experience, but also they they can give you a facility, because when you approach death, the experience of bringing death in by your side is that it can bring up some intense emotions, and I think these emotions are what keeps people from really confronting it oftentimes, right? But once you're sort of developing a facility with those emotions, once you are comfortable with difficult emotions, then I think there's another benefit there that we can really lean into and leverage. So, this is like what I'm trying to say here. I mean, basically, there's something about having these deep emotional experiences that gives you a deep emotional intelligence, and it helps you to open up to to kind of integrate these experiences of grief or fear or existential sort of angst and that kind of thing. And I think this is what's missing from a lot of the approaches that we take today. And so once you've gone through these dark experiences, these dark emotions, and you really let yourself feel them, then it frees you up from the kind of baggage that those can bring along. And I like the way that Stan Grof puts it. He says the full expression of a difficult emotion is the funeral pyre of that emotion, right? So, so all of this, I think, is just, it's pointing to how we can approach death like in Charlotte's Web. If you're familiar with Charlotte's Web, right? The spider eventually dies, but that's okay because it's just part of the cycle of life. Yeah. So you start to develop more of an appreciation for the beauty of endings and new beginnings, right? So is there a role for our current technology in this conversation, right? I don't know. I think I'm looking around and I haven't seen anything too exciting, but I do think a lot about these kind of AI avatars that we're seeing come out, which allows you to create like a AI version of a loved one who's passed away or about to pass away. And I think that's interesting because it could be good, it could be helpful, but also maybe it helps you avoid feeling the grief and other emotions that you need to feel. I'm not sure, they're complicated, right? So TBD on that one. But yeah, I want to just kind of wrap up by talking about some practices that we can all do to kind of cultivate mortal intelligence. So meditation is always recommended. Meditation helps you to manage stress and all that, but also I think meditation gives you this experience of sort of present moment awareness and preparing you for kind of this experience of surrender. But beyond that, there's a great practice that I do quite a bit, which is imagining yourself on your deathbed or writing your own eulogy and thinking about like what would your perspective be in your future self to your present self, in terms of like you on your deathbed, that kind of thing. It's not comfortable, it's not easy to do, but I think it's so important as a practice to kind of develop these things. And then, if you look to other cultures, they have these beautiful ways of honoring ancestors, and they have altars and rituals, like in Mexico, they have this every year, Dia de Muertos, where they honor their ancestors and they honor the dead. And I think having this kind of thing in our culture would help us to cultivate this mortal intelligence. Another practice that I do is memento mori, where you have, this comes from the ancient Greeks, you have some kind of object or talisman that reminds you on a daily basis of your own mortality. So you might have a skull, like a beautiful carved skull, or some kind of painting that reminds you of the fact that you're going to die. I think this is something that really can benefit everyone. You might have a painting like that, for example. So, by doing this, by confronting death and, microdosing death or whatever you want to call it, it helps us to live more in the present moment. And I think this can really transform technology, because once we have this attitude and it spreads through sort of technology leadership and technology innovation, I think it'll change the way we develop technology and the way we sort of innovate. And it'll help us to avoid ultimately the fate of these people who don't really live their lives until they receive a cancer diagnosis or something like that, right? Like in the wonderful Kurosawa movie, Ikiru, the main character, he's a government clerk and he works his whole life in this office, not really living his life until he gets a cancer diagnosis, and then he starts to live. Or a more contemporary example is the show Dying for Sex, where the same thing happens to this woman where she gets a cancer diagnosis and realizes that she's been living somebody else's life her whole life. So, so yeah, this is, I just think this is such an important topic, and nobody's talking about it, or not many people are talking about it. So I think everyone here, obviously, fortunately, we're all maybe wiser and already approaching this. It was great to see all the hands come up at the beginning about who's comfortable with their own death. So I think by entering intentionally into the dark depths of existential angst around death, we can emerge on the other side fearless and free. Not because we have engineered an artificial body or copied our consciousness to the cloud, but because we have realized our true nature as eternally immortal in the first place. There's a profound wisdom in embracing the cycles of birth and death, waking and sleeping. Again, I think immortality sounds good in theory because, if our life is enjoyable, and especially if you have Silicon Valley money, why not live forever? But death is not just an annihilation, but it's a teacher. It can be a teacher. It can remind us to live authentically and to heal our relationships, to take risks, and to let go of what doesn't matter. Facing death, we overcome the fear of failure and embrace a more meaningful life. As the Bhagavad Gita reminds us, there is no such thing as death. There is only life in different forms. Nothing real can be harmed, and nothing unreal exists. So, just in closing, I think creating technology with a materialist mindset, and especially a transhumanist mindset, it creates inhumane and dehumanizing technologies. By befriending death and feeling our feelings, we can create better technologies. And also we can expand the universe of possible technologies. So I invite you in closing to reflect on your own mortality and use it as a path to greater freedom, creativity, and compassion and joy. Death is something we all face, and it can unite us in its transcendental invitation to a deeper place inside of us all. Thank you. Actually, I don't know if we're taking questions. Do we have time for questions? No. Yeah? Okay. Okay. Questions? Who has a question? Okay.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about the hero story in Ernst Becker's work and how this relates to longevity.
The hero story in Ernest Becker's work? Is that the hero's journey? No. Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. So yeah, the question is basically like, how does this relate to the hero's journey and how that's informed our culture? And I think, it's a good point. Our culture is so individualistic, right? It's so like, I'm going to self-realize, I'm going to live the American dream, and I think that's another aspect, or that's another way you could look at the way that transhumanists and techno-utopians are approaching the problem. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's great to confront death, but I think the biggest barrier too is also a lot of fear, which is very biological. And how do you think we can confront the fear?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, it's hard. It's like there is a lot of fear around death, and I realize part of the challenge in our culture is that we are terrible at feeling our feelings in general. Like, nobody teaches us how to do that. Nobody, like, we should have like a whole program in school about like feelings, right? But we don't have that. And so it is a challenge. And I think the way to approach it maybe for the average person is, it's different for everyone, but it's like some kind of intentional practice that allows you to experience feelings in a sort of diminished way, like whether that's some kind of medicine or some kind of therapy, or it depends on the person, but yeah, just like the power of learning to turn towards fear and use that as a like directional signal is such a amazing power. So yeah, I would love to teach people how to do that more. And there's a yoga practice that I've taught over many years that helps with that too. But it's like you have to find the right modality for people. So it's, yeah, it really depends. Yeah, yeah. Hmm? Oh, the yoga practice that I teach is called Sattva. Sattva. It's from northern India. Yeah.
Yeah, after listening to a lot of what you had to say, I'm really curious, after observing and understanding the ancient practice, the paths that they created, and their journey, maybe what your thoughts are on the modern day with transhumanism and why it went in that direction.
What, so you want to know, in terms of the ancient practices, why transhumanism went in the direction it's going? Yeah. I mean, I think this has to do with the Enlightenment and the industrial age and the way that we've, again, like moved entirely into our left hemisphere and have lost touch with our body. We've lost touch with our emotional body. We've sort of like overemphasized rationality, and rationality is like almost like a god, you know. And I think when you only live in a rational world, in a rational society, a rational self, then it's so hard to, like the only option you have is to look to technology. It's because like technology so far has like dazzled us with all these amazing like gadgets and stuff, you know, and it's such a almost like magical force in a way that it makes you think that it's a solution to everything, but it's actually just, we've only learned how to manipulate matter into like a smartphone and maybe a large language model, but we haven't actually learned to do anything truly transformational or important with it, I feel. So I think we have to get out of the left hemisphere. We have to get into the body. We have to develop our intuition and our imagination and our consciousness. And you know, in terms of like, I really enjoyed Stephen's talk before this, and I think we have to stop seeing ourselves as only animals with these sort of like hardwired brains, and to see ourselves as conscious beings who can evolve our consciousness through different practices. You know, so. Yeah, well, no, let's take one more question and then, yeah, you can talk after.
Yeah, so it's a little personal for me to share. So I survived stage 4 cancer. And so at one point, that was so obvious for me because my doctor was actually worried if I could make it through in a year. But luckily, he didn't tell me. And so without knowing, apparently I'm still here, right? And I started a company to leverage arts to help people managing stress. And as a social impact entrepreneur, I'm under a lot of stress. So sometimes I forgot how hard that I fight to get my body back. And then so I feel like very emotional because I got represent to that sort of the preciousness of life, right? And then how would you, I see value that when I be present to that, to myself and also to other people. But for people, I'm sure I'm not alone. Like, you know, in Chinese, we say like when the scars heal, sometimes you forget how painful that is. And sometimes I feel like I'm kind of like that. Like, how would you recommend people to really be present, or why I even started my company, Dance for Healing, in the first place, right? Like, you know, it's because of my personal journey, but as I'm fighting and struggle as a social impact entrepreneur, I forgot all that. I forgot to manage my own stress, right?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm glad you're here, and thank you for sharing that. Yeah, and you probably know better than anybody else here, you know, what I'm talking about. But you're saying part of what you're saying is that it's easy to forget, even if you've had a cancer diagnosis, it's easy to forget to have that reminder. Maybe, you know, maybe part of it is some of the things I talked about in terms of like keeping an object around, or just different ways to help you keep it present with you at all times, right? Maybe a quote on your mirror or something like that. These are very simple ways, but it's interesting. Thank you for sharing that, because I would have never thought that it's easy to forget even if you've had cancer, right? So yeah, so thank you for that, yeah. Do we have more time, or should we wrap it up? One more? Okay, one more question. Anybody? No? Yeah? Okay.
In your experience of diving into this subject, have you looked into a fear that's greater than death? In my exploration of it, I'll just say, is dying incomplete. So then the fear isn't really death, is the fear of incompletion. And the irony there of being obsessed with trying to prolong death is that you actually don't take the time to live into your completion of your lessons yet.
Yeah, the fear of not having done everything you want to do before you die. Yeah, that's definitely part of it. I think that's part of the fear of death. But it's so interesting because, like, why wouldn't that motivate you to do those things, right? And it's funny how we don't do that. Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of it's a big conversation, but part of what I feel is wrong with our society right now is that, like, most people aren't doing what they want to do, right? They're actually just like trying to fit into a box, or they're like, trying to follow some kind of like rules or something. And if everyone just, I mean, this sounds a little bit maybe privileged, but like if everyone just did what they wanted to do, then the whole world would change. But that's fear, right? And so I think somehow we have to teach people how to, again, like approach fear in the right way. And I'm not sure exactly. I think it depends on the person, right? So anyways, yeah, thank you for the question. Yeah. Microdose fear. Yeah. Yes. Amen to that. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.